Namaste. My name is Sangeetha Menon. I work at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, which is in the campus of Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. We all at this moment share a fundamental experience of being locked down to our homes, our rooms, our physical spaces, and spatially limited. We also share another fundamental experience common to all of us of feeling connected mentally, existentially, in spite of the physically limiting spaces, which means we are housing two somewhat opposing forces of the body and mind in each one of us, of the immobility of the body beyond the walls of our residence and of immense mobility of our minds to reach across people, varied domains, and so on. The first experience of immobility is of the nature of restricting, limiting, and controlling. The second one is of connecting, exploring, and liberating. What I wish to imagine with you in the next perhaps 30 to 40 minutes is the play of these opposing powers of experience which reside in each one of us. There are two key words that are present most of the time in our living, being, and in communication. The essence of those two keywords define and design our personalities and attitudes. And these keywords are knowledge that leads and experience that leads to feeling. The scientific turn in 15th century and the philosophical debates which started many centuries before are founded on the divide of these two keywords, namely reason and experience. What is the nature of reasoning, or what we more sophisticated way call as rationality? Reasoning and rationality give rise to objectivity. And from the idea of objectivity, we also derive a sense of detachment. Experience leads to subjectivity, being adhering to a person. And from that, a sense of vulnerability of being a self and influencing the recent knowledge. And that is why we believe that the rational processes and the experiential processes have to be distinguished and divided. Whether that's right is a question which we will examine soon. This fundamental divide between experience and reasoning also gave rise to different ways in which we look at nature and its evolutionary processes, and culture and its psychosocial processes. There has been a historical interest in the dialectics and the dualistic neatness of engaging with the complexities of both nature and culture. Thus, we pose paradigms as to how content of our sensations and cognitions have to be divided. So, we have the Baconian Cartesian rationality versus the Husserlian phenomenology, the Apollonian reason versus the Dionysian absurdity, the Shankarite non-dual real versus the Abhinavagupta transcendental aesthetics. The discussion on dialectics, whether it be in the scientific methodologies or Freudian psychoanalysis, tell us that there is a fundamental binary that influences our lives, worldviews, and most importantly, how we relate and communicate as conscious agents. We continuously and in a taken for granted manner engage and exist with these binaries. At this point and in this discussion that is titled as Understanding the Lockdown Experience, well, we can say that we have taken without further questioning that both understanding and experiencing is central to our existence and living. The need and desire to know and understand, the choiceless pangs and pleasures of experience that follows each one of us every moment. In essence, we cannot pretend that there is a stoic sense of objectivity and detachment that is bereft and away from the person. Let's look at some of these binaries that are intertwined in both the process of knowledge and experience and in our ways of understanding and feeling. Listening and endorsing. We listen to people, but not only we listen, we also have the need to speak, endorse our own beliefs, our own ways of thinking. Another binary, detaching and engaging. We not only detach and stand away from people, entities, spaces, but we also engage with all this. And we are capable of both. And the third binary, which is extremely important at this point, of distancing and participating. We can distance from something and someone and still be okay, or we can also participate in something in a wholehearted manner. In fact, we could say that at this point we are doing both distancing and participating. But this binary of distancing and participating reminds us of another very classical dual, namely the society and the individual, which again implies very important binary in terms of the collective and the reflective. And finally, and which is our experience today, the state enforcement and public participation. Now, these binaries, either by the very dynamic and opposing nature, can lead to disillusionment, dejection, and a certain sense of hopelessness. But by its very dynamic and opposing nature, these binaries also have the power to bring in a spark of light, a spark of enlightenment. Why do we say this? We are all social beings. Let's not forget that. What is essential to be a social animal is to reach out, connect, form structures and hierarchies within the community, use sophisticated methods for both individual and group advantages, and finally, being a collective that aims survival. In a collective, individuals come and go, but the network of togetherness stay, leading to better reflections. Thus, we are also reflective beings, not just beings who reason, but reflect. And many of us are doing that at this moment, and perhaps since many days. In a collective, individuals come and go, but our power to reflect continues to stay. The process of understanding, often we think, has only detached objectifying factors. We often assume that a subject can objectify without being influenced by his or her personality and subjectivity. We have taken subjectivity versus objectivity as the default binary, as if it is just given, it has just fallen from heaven, leaving no doubt to its existence and veracity, as if it is the grand truth and a fact in blood and flesh. Philosophy of science and philosophy of mind historically have shown several examples how this is not true. The object influences the subject, and there is no untouched objectivity. The subject influences the object, and there is no pure subjectivity. This century saw another exciting binary, and the discussion of which continue to influence neurosciences and neuropsychology, which is the brain consciousness binary. Let's see from this binary point of view how we understand the experiencing of being locked down or the lockdown experience. The brain influences our mind, And our mind also influences the brain. There's a sort of partnership between them, a conspiracy between them. This partnership is expressed in most complex ways, but in terms of simple day to day experiences of emotions, attitudes, beliefs, value systems, etc., unless they are challenged neurologically or psychiatrically. The two powerful experiences we enjoy as part of the brain mind partnership are the sense of the body and the sense of the self, of being a body and also being oneself. Usually these come as together. But first, let us see what is the sense of the body. The body sense, in brief words, is constituted of somatosensory content, ability to carry the peripersonal space and be endowed with the proprioceptive capability. Today, neuroscience research tells us that there are several kinds of topographic maps of the body stored in the brain cortex, which are altered and updated according to newer experiences and the changing environment. Brain is capable of the cartographic ways of placement of the body and the body parts, the limbs, structurally in the cortex in a miniature way. The brain starts forming maps of the body from early in life. With age and experience, our brains would have created and stored several complex maps. Brain maps primarily function as bidirectional feedback systems. Our experiences changed the brain maps, and with reorganized brain maps, our experiences also are altered. Apart from the internal and external points of sensation, the body sense is also deeply influenced by certain other mechanisms which are available to us intuitively and without our conscious effort. They are the body maps in the brain that make mirror neurons relevant and provide us with proprioceptive capabilities and demarcated peripersonal space. The brain maps not only the physical body, but also the space around the body. Can you believe that? It maps the space around the body, which houses objects, our tools, which means our pens, telephones, mobiles, and so on, and people with whom we interact, and in short, all our sociocultural expressions. It's interesting that we move around with an arm's length of space around us that we identify as an extension of our body. The space that extends to the limits of our arm or the tip of the tool we use is called the peripersonal space. Peripersonal space is a recently recognized neurological topic. Body senses influenced by the peripersonal space we live and move with. Peripersonal space is the invisible volume of space around our body, as I said, to our arm's length, and it is part of us. My peripersonal space extends to the tip of my pen when I write, and perhaps to the screen of my laptop as I speak now. Basically, our peripersonal space is formed of the tools we use, relations we form, the costumes we wear, and houses we live, and also the professions we do, values we hold, beliefs we have. And the peripersonal space too keeps updating as we move and do different things, as we change psychologically, as we change our domains physically and mentally. It continues to include and exclude as well objects, people, and all other entities that come to us in our everyday life. In a sense, we can say that peripersonal space is an expression of the subjectivity inherent in the body sense, that sense of the self. When I drive a car, my peripersonal space includes the car. The car becomes an extension of my body and is mapped by the brain accordingly. We include the car in terms of our peripersonal space. Thus, body becomes more than the biological body by including its psychological, social, and cultural extensions. These sensory mechanisms cannot be completely labeled as physical since they involve a collaborative relation with mental attributes. Science is yet to figure out with greater clarity the origins and constituents of body maps in the brain. Because of brain maps, we have a collection of intuitive, automatic capabilities to perceive location, movement, and action of a part of the body in relation with other parts. This group of capabilities is together known as proprioception. Proprioception helps us to engage, and gauge internally the measure of effort needed to lift and move objects. The measure of effort, of the pressure we exert, is different for lifting or moving different objects. Our body intuitively calculates the precise amount of effort with the help of proprioceptive capability. We are able to take and maintain different postures without failing and falling because of proprioceptive capability. What are the different elements of a typical experience? Now, let's get into a discussion on the sense of the self. A typical simple experience, even a visual experience, includes thoughts, sensations, feelings, and moods. We may question whether any experience can be marked as simplistic, for that matter. Even smelling a flower or hearing a sound or any such sensation comes with a barrage of memories, desires, feelings, hidden thoughts, and goals associated with it, leading to a concept of ourself. We are able to move from one experience to another or collate different experiences and archive them in memories because of this self concept. To understand the self sense is to also see how the self concept is continually updated or transformed. The self concept is fed by the me and the other divide. The way we reflect upon ourselves and the other, and our theory of mind to design our decisions and actions according to assumptions of what the other mind is going through. Ulrich Neisser, he is otherwise more well known as the father of cognitive psychology. He describes 5 aspects of the self based on different forms of information received and engaged with. These different aspects of the self are rarely experienced as distinct. They come together, but they differ in having different developmental histories, aspects of immediacy, and in what they contribute to human experience. They are subject to different kinds of psychological challenges as well. These 5 aspects of the self are the ecological self, which is directly perceived with respect to the immediate physical environment. The interpersonal self is also directly perceived due to transference of information between members of the species and through emotional rapport and communication. The extended self, not directly perceived, but based on memory and anticipation. The private self, it appears when we discover that our conscious experiences are exclusively our own. And finally, the conceptual self, or the self concept, which is based on socially invented or discovered or defined assumptions about ourselves. Now, self sense is an indivisible, continuous, and organic intuitive sense that accompanies human lives. A continuous story that we narrate to oneself. We don't have to look around for the presence of self because its access is the starting point to do everything else. Without a presence of self, we just cannot do anything. The sense of self gives an organic whole in every little experience of belonging to it and endorsing it as one's own experience. The commonest guideline in biology for assessing the existence of a well developed self sense is the mirror test. Cats and dogs do not recognize their images in the mirror, so they respond to the images. Chimpanzees see the image in the mirror as themselves. And baboons and macaques follow the mirror test, though they have a social self. They recognize members of the social group, dominant status, etc. In humans, the self sense is responsible for self recognition, which makes our life smooth, comfortable, and most importantly, oriented towards a purpose. It enables us to recognize ourselves as independent entities that exist separate from the environment. I am the thinker of my thoughts, experiencer of my emotions, beholder of my values, attitudes, and owner of all these in an organic, integrated fashion, not in a disconnected manner. With the self sense, we become the agents of our bodily movements, possess intentions, make choices, and perform our daily activities. A fundamental feature of the self sense is the ability to separate ourself, oneself, from the rest of the people, the rest of entities, beings, and to recognize oneself as an independent entity that exists distinct from the environment. Now, let's come to an important juncture in consciousness studies. There is this Australian mathematician turned philosopher whose theory heralded the consciousness studies domain into a new space altogether. And his contribution was that he reintroduced the whole idea of binary as dominant in our thinking. He distinguished between what is called as the EC and the heart problem, the EC problems in a plural and the heart problem in singular. What is EC problems? EC problems is basically how the neural processes work and function to give rise to sensory experience. It's not simple, but it's believed that with discoveries and better technological advancements, EC problems may become solved. But then there is another problem, according to Chalmers, which he calls as the heart problem. How the discrete distributed neurochemical processes together give rise to a unitary qualitative sense of the self, of being, you, and me. With this introduction of the $1,000,000 question of the capability of the brain to give rise to a self, the project of binaries had to introduce a third entity called consciousness. Now, from this point of view of the binaries plus consciousness, it's interesting to look at the sense of the self and sense of the body. On one side, we have objectivity, which is driven by a sense of a physical body being strong and limited to a sense of body, and by the ability to reason and to understand. On the other side of the binary, and led by subjectivity to have a sense of self, of feeling, and of experiencing. Now, to add to this binary is a third entity, which is almost a challenge to the binary, which is produced by consciousness. And what is produced by this third entity called consciousness? It is the reflective capabilities, yours and mine, our ability to reflect upon something in a non-dual and non-binary fashion. And this gives focus to the importance of self-awareness and self-reflection. So, from the point of view of consciousness, we can say that the reflective conscious capabilities are founded on something which is beyond the objectivity, subjectivity driven body sense and self sense. And it points to us that there are possibilities for us to look beyond our cognitive and reasoning capabilities, to see oneself as beyond the body mind binary. Apart from the somatosensory and cognitive advantages we have as a species, the humans are also capable of having the sense of hope, the sense of purpose, the sense of change, and the sense of self transformation. From a humanistic and positive psychology perspective, we can say that there is hope even when we think there is only hopelessness. Thus, we all would have heard about this famous fable of Sisyphus and the folk variations of the same story we have in India, of the absurd hero who toils or struggles day in and day out and carries the burden of the rock to lift it to the mountain top. And what does he do after reaching the mountain top? With this heavy rock, he throws it down. And he goes down again, toils, take the rock up to the hilltop, and then release it. This continues. This effort continues. We might say this is the ultimate sarcasm on human agency and purpose. But if we carefully examine, we can see that unless there is the purposeful force of hope, of carrying the rock up, this action won't recur and loop in an eternal sense, which means even in absurdity and actions which we think are produced of absurdity and actions which might sometimes lead to self-denial, even in those moments of hopelessness, the sense of hope looms large. Now, let me come back to the central point of today's discussion, and not just today's discussion, I guess, but what we started about 3 weeks back, which is the exercise and choice of lockdown, of being locked down. There are immensely important economic and sociological questions too associated with lockdown. I'm aware of it, and I'm very sensitive to these questions as well, just as you are. But in this discussion, we will go into them only perhaps in a theoretical manner and not discuss specific issues. From what we have discussed until now, how do we analyze the lockdown experience each one of us are engaging with, undergoing, even this very moment, as I speak to you through this digital platform, and as you listen to me holding your digital devices? Can we break down the components of the lockdown experience? Perhaps we have never categorized something as a lockdown experience. It's rather new, at least since the Spanish flu times. How do we understand the lockdown? And please remember, I am highlighting the word understand here. How do we understand the lockdown phenomenon? Let's say it is understood from the perspective of being ideological, of perhaps even being political, and of course, epidemiological, economical for sure, theoretical, and also strategic. This is the way perhaps we understand lockdown. But then we all know that it doesn't stop with understanding. In fact, perhaps what is looming large is the experience of lockdown. How do we experience the lockdown? How are we experiencing the lockdown? Let me say that in a present continuous manner. Experience of the lockdown can be, let's say, first, the sense of confinement, of being restrained, of being immobile, confined to your spaces. To begin with, the space of your house, your residence, and the experience of resenting the confinement, and the need to go out, to get out of the confinement. Because at times, the physical confinement also turns us to relate confinement in a very psychological manner. And when that doesn't happen, we only resent and nothing happens. We also have a sense of helplessness. So we also experience the lockdown in terms of helplessness. We also feel isolation, isolated from the mainstream, from the community, from the streets, maybe isolated from food. We don't know. Different people, different experience isolation in very different manners. Also, the experience of alienation. Now, what I just listed actually is one side of experiences, perhaps a challenging side of the experience, a bit of a discouraging, side of experience. But then there is another side of the experience of lockdown, which leads to degrees of refinement. And you and I would agree that these degrees of refinement have been there in the last 3 weeks, and the more than last weeks, as we have now entered or crossed over 3 weeks. If we acknowledge that both the processes of understanding and experiencing are the horns, HORNS, horns of a dialectic that will come back and be persistent eternally. And both these processes together point to the power of hope, awareness, and reflection. And from there, the sense of a larger purpose. Then, at that point, what we find is not that one sided, perhaps a challenging notions of experience, but a degree of meaning, meaning with a capital M. The choices we have made, though confined to the walls of our homes, to make the best use of the available time we all have now. Some of us work from home, some of us do not work from home, some of us do both. We all know. Make the best use of available utilities, connecting with what was earlier disconnected from, watching and acknowledging the limits and possibilities of one's own mind, connecting with people whom we earlier just denounced and didn't care for, choosing from available options which we have, whether it be digital or non-digital, or even at home, what to cook and not to cook, waiting patiently, anticipating, adjusting, and reflecting on the scenario as a whole, sharing in unimaginable ways, and healing oneself and the other in this process, which is the other side of the lockdown experience. If we look upon the fundamental binary from the lens of the deeper sense of awareness and reflection, we get to see points of brilliance that the duals of understanding and knowledge and experiencing or being a self together leads to enlightenment. Enlightenment which makes us capable to respect, to acknowledge what is difficult to acknowledge, and to integrate change with a capital C into what we think is changeless. Partnership and collectives between communities, knowledge that recognizes plurality of existence, both of the microbial organisms and higher species, and compassion that melts the rigidities and arrogant certainties that we carry with us, thinking and believing that we live in an utopian world of hedonistic pleasures for just one species, which is the humans alone. So, the final topic for our core reflection is lockdown experience an experience of reformation, refinement, calmness, settlement, patience, and inclusion and enlightenment? Yes, if we are deeply aware of the dialectic nature of binaries that have been controlling us, influencing us, perhaps for better or worse, we don't know. If we are deeply aware of this dialectic, the nature of this dialectic, perhaps we will be able to rise above it and rise above the power of the binary to divide us and rule us, and instead to trust in the power of inclusive awareness, even when we are today standing on the edge of the larger human purpose to coexist with the rest of life and its manifestations. Thank you. So I'm told that there would be a few questions coming, and so I would just spend a minute just to look at some of the questions if I can answer them. Otherwise, I can be directly contacted. And one question which I see from Professor Amritavalli is the sense of hope and purpose rooted in subjective emotion? Well, I would distinguish between the subject as well as the emotion, because these are all very complex words and a lot of nuances and layers are embedded in being a subject and having emotions. We ourselves know when we become emotional, how much we have to delayer a single emotion when we reflect upon them. So it's very easy to perhaps understand the experience of emotion, let alone experience the emotion. The sense of hope and purpose perhaps can be driven by the passions of emotions we have, but it cannot be embedded in a rooted manner in emotion, because emotions most of the time limits the purpose to be at the moment, and most of the time in a hedonistic fashion. So the seat of purpose has to be something else. And emotions definitely are important. And but it has to be distinguished from the seat of the sense of purpose and reflection. Well, I see many other comments, but perhaps they are much more complex than what I can take them now. And one of the comment, which I'll just read out, is from Bindu Day. I don't know from where she is. She says the lockdown has given us an opportunity to touch ourselves around us in a profound manner. I think that almost kind of uh, gives a synopsis of what I wanted to communicate with you. And another comment which I see, the binaries of cognition are in the ongoing dance. What aids in pushing the limits to say conscious? Okay, it's not a comment, it's a question. Yes, as we try to discuss, binaries try to rule and divide. And of course, it gives some sort of respectable knowledge and the power of reasoning, which is very good, which makes us think that we are scientific. But to be scientific is also to give up something which we believed earlier, but it doesn't make sense in the present moment. So, how to stay conscious or how to bring in the power of consciousness is to be awareful of the binaries in an inclusive manner. And I think the word inclusion is very important. We all use binaries, but the usage of binaries makes us isolated because we tend to focus only on one part of the binary and tend to weigh down the other part of the binary. Weighing both both the duals of the binary are equally important, and that can happen only in a heightened sense of awareness, which is integral and inclusive. Okay, so I think I would stop here, and many people are conveying their namaste and greetings. So once again, uh, thank you for listening to me, and namaste. And my friend Sri Prasad ji tells me that tomorrow in the talk, you have Dr. Sambhadananda Mishra, who is the director of SAFIC in Puducherry, and he will talk on the importance of Sanskrit in the era of modern science. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Namaste.